A very good evening. It is time for the press preview. It's our first look at what is on tomorrow's front pages. And tonight we'll be checking out the headlines with the senior political correspondent at the Daily Express, Calgie, and the writer and broadcaster, Amy Nickell-Turner. A very good evening to both of you. We will chat in a moment. Let's check out some of those front pages first, though. The continuing Conservative election nightmare, including the narrow loss of the West Midlands mayoralty to Labour, is lead story in The Observer, with fresh calls from the Labour leader for a general election. The Telegraph highlights Labour's mayoral wins in the West Midlands and also London, all of which, says the Sunday Times, has gone to boost Keir Starmer's hopes of getting the keys to number 10. We'll show you that in a bit. Let's take a look at the Sunday Express. We're doomed. Lame duck PM loses Tory stronghold. That's their headline. And the People leads with those awful stabbings at Hainault in London. And don't forget, you can scan the QR code that you see on screen during the programme. You can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discussing them. And I'm joined tonight by the writer and broadcaster, Amy Nickell-Turner, and senior political correspondent at the Daily Express, Calgie. Great to see you both this bank holiday weekend. And what a 48 hours it has been. Quite remarkable, hasn't it? The twists and turns. And it finished, Amy, on a knife-edge result. No one knew which way it was going to go until the last minute. And then Andy Street losing his title of Mayor of the West Midlands and putting Rishi Sunak in a whole heap of trouble.
Yeah, what a swing. What a swing across the country. And it was all hanging on Andy Street, who was ultimately a very, very popular local mayor. So it seems like Rishi Sunak has essentially robbed him of his mayoral title, because he's a great mayor. And I think it's symbolic because Rishi Sunak is now essentially squatting in number 10, I would say. You mentioned the keys to number 10. They're keys are Keir Starmer's, aren't they? So my question would be, does Rishi Sunak have a mandate at this point? And I think The Observer feels the same. You know, they're talking about ending the purgatory of zombie rule. Rishi Sunak needs to put this to the people now, because through what we've seen through these results, he doesn't have the people's support anymore. And Andy Street felt that today, and he didn't deserve to.
OK, well, let's have a listen to what Andy Street had to say, because he said, didn't he, that he felt the blame had to be on his shoulders. He wasn't blaming anyone else. He wasn't blaming the Prime Minister or indeed the wider Conservative Party. He said it was all down to him. Let's have a listen.
I feel actually incredibly proud of what I and my Conservative team have done here. As you said in your question, 1,500 votes in it when many people gave us no chance given the national polls. And so actually I'm not in any mood for blaming and allocating that around. It was my campaign. I did it, dare I say it, my way. It wasn't quite good enough, and I am the only person responsible for this.
What's your take, Christian, on all of this? Let's perhaps bring in the front of the Sunday Telegraph. Labour wins in West Midlands and London. Quite a busy night for newspaper editors trying to get the headline at the last minute, but many of them have managed it. What's your takeaway?
Well, I think the last 24 hours have been as bad as they could have been for Rishi Sunak. He was very much hoping that MPs, journalists might look at the fact they held on in the Tees Valley with Ben Houchen and perhaps get bored and move on and have a nice bank holiday weekend. But what has happened today is the results got even worse, compounded by what was an absolute bodge job in expectation management with London. And actually, even though Sadiq Khan didn't have a particularly convincing win, the fact he ended up winning by 10 points, the fact that it had been briefed that Susan Hall was in a position to be coming close to that means that Labour and Starmer, both in London, the West Midlands, right across the country, have stolen an absolute march. And what I'm picking up, what many journalists are picking up, is the utter gloom, dejectedness, fatalism of Tory MPs now. The Sunday Telegraph has some quotes from Suella Braverman, who, on the one hand, positively says it is not now the time to change leader. She says effectively it's too late, it should have been done a long time ago. And she says the hole to dig us out of is the Prime Minister's and it's time for him to start shoveling. And really, I think if Rishi Sunak wants to stay in power now, he has got to work his socks off. And I don't mean win the election, I just mean to stay in office between now and this supposed November election.
Well, apparently he's got some suggestions. So to attempt to get back on the front foot, which would take some doing, he's decided he's going to push ahead with his Rwanda plan, crack down on illegal immigration and crack down further on people claiming sickness benefits. I don't know if that's going to be much of a vote winner at this point.
Yeah, do you think he'll take some comfort, a glimmer of comfort, from the fact that if you look at a projection to the general election based on these results, then it's perhaps not as bad as some had feared? Michael Thrasher suggesting they might be 10% ahead Labour as opposed to 20% or so in the polls.
Yeah, and there were slight gaps in the voting, and I think that came down primarily to the stance on Gaza, and equally some people aren't getting behind Keir Starmer because he's seen as furthering austerity measures and sort of backing, particularly with things like the two-child benefit cap. So it's true, they do still have a little bit of work to do, and I'm not sure that anyone is a massive Keir Starmer fan. We don't really see that. But I think they've got the same thorn in their side in the sense that there's a similarity between that and what Reform are doing to the Conservative vote, because with the example of Andy Street, bringing that back, if Reform hadn't have stood, he would have won that. He would have won the mayoral election there.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, that, isn't it? And let's bring in your paper, Christian, the Sunday Express. We're doomed. Lame duck PM loses Tory stronghold is the headline. What do your voters think of Rishi Sunak? What do they think, indeed, of Reform?
I think Reform is a very attractive option for our readers because they are offering a conviction vision of what the country should be.
But just no more migrants.
Well,
is that kind of because they want to take 5% off each budget, each government department, right? They want to shave off.
I think I'm not going to be a spokesperson for the Reform Party, and I think actually their small boat policy has a number of flaws in it. But I think what people want is decisive leadership, and they're not getting it from the Tories at the moment. There's some great quotes in this story. So if we can't win here, I think this was about the West Midlands, then we're doomed. He's a lame duck leader, and it looks like we'll all be limping on to defeat at the general election. Another Conservative source says it's a sure harbinger of the coming electoral doom. And this is now, I think, the problem for Rishi Sunak. I don't pick up the appetite for a change in leader.
We've had enough of them.
Well, you can't have 4 prime ministers in 5 years. But my goodness, how do you govern a party from now until November when the party has not just given up on you, but it almost feels like they've given up on existing? It's like they've had a terminal sort of diagnosis and now just waiting for the end.
Yeah, let's bring in the front of the Sunday Times then. Defeat for Street boosts Starmer's hopes of number 10. And Amy, on that point that Christian was saying, it's almost as if the Conservatives are caught now between a more centrist Labour Party and Reform. And this feels almost like a battle, doesn't it, for the soul of the Conservative Party? But it's a bit late to be having that battle, given that a general election is around the corner.
But I think we have been seeing these shifts in by-elections as far back as when Boris Johnson was in power and we had the Chesham and Amersham swing. I think people are just looking in their bank accounts and they're not feeling as well off as they were in 2010, and it's been 14 years in the making, this demise, and it's almost like death by 1,000 cuts. There's just been so many little movements towards what we now see as Victorian levels of inequality in the 6th richest economy in the world, and people are just sick of that and ready for a change and a bit of hope, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Only a week ago, Rishi Sunak was sort of on the front foot, really. We had the Rwanda deal had gone through, welfare reform, there was
defence as well.
Defence budgets.
And that was, I think, those things they played in Westminster. Tory MPs felt more optimistic. The problem was that we didn't see that translate through into any polls. That is the core of the problem, is I think voters have stopped listening. And nothing can turn that around. That is what happens at the end of long periods of government with Brown and with John Major. This is the natural course of events, and I think most Tory MPs will agree. The problem isn't the leadership; it's the fact that whoever is trying to change the direction of the ship, the steering wheel is no longer connected to the rudder, and I don't think they can change direction because the public have had enough.
I think it's because the public are feeling the impact of this government. People are looking at their mortgages. People are trying to get GP appointments. People's kids are going to schools that are made of aero bars. Like, they've just had enough.
Well, I think that is the. I think actually number 10 could possibly agree with you, not publicly, but what they would say is actually a lot of the stuff that's talked about, the culture wars, the Gaza, that is peripheral. What matters in an election is the economy, and that is still what number 10 are going to be banking on, is go long, hope that interest rates come down, inflation probably hit 2%, we'll be out of a recession when the next figures come through, and pray that by that point people are feeling a bit optimistic. I just don't happen to agree with them in that optimism.
No. OK. Great to get your thoughts on what has been a fascinating couple of days. Thank you very much. We'll speak again in a moment. Coming up after the break, you needed some good news, and now King Charles gets just that with this story. It's on the front of the Mail on Sunday. Just what the doctor ordered. Poll boost for Charles. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, the writer and broadcaster Amy Nickell-Turner and the senior political correspondent at the Daily Express, Christian Calgie. Good to see you both again. Well, away from the election, there is other news happening. As the Mail on Sunday tells us, they've done an exclusive poll. Someone's got some good news when it comes to what the public think of them, and that is the King. I mean, slightly bizarre having this story on the front of the Mail on Sunday, given everything that's gone on over the last couple of days. But there we are. They've gone for just what the doctor ordered, poll boost for Charles. Amy, they're saying that the King has received a major vote of confidence on the anniversary of his coronation.
Well, I am thrilled that someone has had a vote of confidence and that this is the poll that the Mail wants to draw our attention to, and they've conveniently just ignored all the other polls that may or may not have happened today. But they have taken the time to home in on Angela Rayner just off to the side there, to just try and stick the knife in a little bit. It is basically the most positive
front page for the Conservative Party.
I've got to admire their efforts, I have to say.
But I think this was probably always going to happen. I know there was some hesitancy when the King came to the throne. He's had a very rocky life compared to the Queen, a lot of personal trials and tribulations. But I was always very confident that once he was in the job and people got to see what made him tick and how he interacted with the public, and they're saying that a clear majority of the public want to keep the monarchy and only around a quarter now want a republic.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you'd think the Mail, King Charles is notoriously green. I think he'd be fully in support of things like you, Les. Yet he's apparently really popular. So
well, the numbers are interesting. Do you think the monarchy is good or bad for Britain? 52% said good, 27% said bad. Should Charles, this is an interesting one, should Charles continue to speak out on issues that matter to him? 57% said yes, only 30% said no.
They don't like royals when they start chatting.
That's until they're confronted with what those views are, surely.
Yeah, to be a popular royal,
if they're offended, they might not agree so much.
Who are better role models, William and Kate or Harry and Meghan? No surprise there. 71% saying William and Kate, 14% saying Harry and Meghan. OK, well, it's an interesting front page, given everything that's gone on.
Also, the Angela Rayner bit, I'm like, OK, fine, I want to talk about this woman's second house. Most people in this country can't even afford a house. There are 140 homeless children in this country. No one cares about Angela Rayner, OK?
Do you think that story... Do you think that's true? Do you think that story's cutting through?
No.
Well, there was a BBC correspondent in Manchester who said it hadn't particularly come up on the doorstep. I think this is one of those stories that might only cut through as and when the police report back. But clearly it hasn't worked ahead of the local elections to turn around the Tories' fortunes at this
Absolutely
point.
not. It's about as interesting as that Cobra beer that Keir Starmer had in Durham. It's not happening.
I happen to think the police ruled wrong on that one, but I think the problem with this story is it is very complicated, and it's all, you know, she said, he said about land registry and whether it was electorally wrong, whether there was potential tax implications, which basically I don't think anyone can get their heads around. It's a matter
of £3,000. Do you know what, though? If you can go into someone's past with a fine-tooth comb and try digging for dirt as much as this newspaper would, and that's all you can find, I find that quite encouraging for our future Deputy PM.
OK, good point. Listen, let's finish with this story. I mean, it's desperately sad, isn't it? It's on the front of the Sunday People. We will ban the sword that killed Daniel. Daniel's parents have issued a very moving statement today, but Labour says that it will foster a swift ban on swords following the killing of Daniel. I mean, how do you get hold of one of these swords in the first place? And also, how do you ban them? I mean, it's a sort of strange take.
Yes, it's one of those policy promises which seems very obvious on. You know, at the front of it, but then you start thinking, well, why might the government have not already done this? I mean, the government's already announced 2 or 3 bans now on so-called zombie knives, which are the very large knives that have sort of perforated edges and sort of designs on them. Clearly, these swords were already illegal to carry in public. So either the government is getting advice saying there's a clear sort of industry need for machetes, or it's clearly inaction. But I'd be very surprised if the government weren't listening to the plight of this family. And, you know, actually, these machetes are, you know, I've seen one.
It's a samurai sword.
It's a samurai sword.
Yeah.
I've seen a horrible, terrifying knife on the street, and many people have. And that's why I was so offended last week when this happened, and just the week before, Sadiq Khan had laughed when this issue of knives were raised and accused his Tory opponent of watching too much of The Wire. I thought that was deeply offensive.
But in his defence, she had used in her campaign a video shot in, I think, Baltimore, which was completely irrelevant, and that was what he was making reference to. And actually, Sadiq Khan's approach to knife crime is more holistic, and he recognises that it's very complex and includes, you know, social policy, economic policy.
Working.
It's probably not working because after years of austerity, our mental health services are failing. You know, our education is failing. So I think for anything to actually work, you need support in prevention and education from central government. If anything, a ban like this would be welcome, but I think ultimately it would be just symbolic.
Symbolic, yeah. Saying here that Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has pledged to outlaw the weapons after years of Tory dithering. She spoke, of course, as Daniel's devastated parents paid tribute to the most loved and amazing son. Desperately sad. OK, thank you both very much.